Pietism was a movement within Lutheranism that began in the late 17th century, reached its zenith in the mid-18th century, and declined through the 19th century, and had almost vanished in America by the end of the 20th century. While declining as an identifiable Lutheran group, some of its theological tenets influenced Protestantism and Anabaptism generally, inspiring the Anglican priest John Wesley to begin the Methodist movement and Alexander Mack to begin the Brethren movement. The Pietist movement combined the Lutheranism of the time with a Reformed emphasis on individual piety and living a vigorous Christian life. Though Pietism shares an emphasis on personal behavior with the Puritan movement, and the two are often confused, there are important differences, particularly in the concept of the role of religion in government. Forerunners, as the forerunners of the Pietists in the strict sense, certain voices had been heard bewailing the shortcomings of the Church and advocating a revival of practical and devout Christianity. Amongst them were the Christian mystic Jacob Bar Paragraphum, Johann Arndt, whose work, True Christianity, became widely known and appreciated. Heinrich Marwan Courteler, who described the font, the pulpit, the confessional and the altar as the four dumb idols of the Lutheran Church. The theologian Johann Valentin Andrea, court chaplain of the Landgrave of Hesse. Schupius, who sought to restore the Bible to its place in the pulpit. And Theophilus Grossbohr of Rostock, who from his pulpit and by his writings raised what he called the alarm cry of a watchman in sin. Founding the direct originator of the movement was Philip Jacob Spener. Born at Rappoltsweiler in Alsace, now in France, on January 13, 1635, trained by a devout godmother who used books of devotion like Arndt's True Christianity, Spener was convinced of the necessity of a moral and religious reformation within German Lutheranism. He studied theology at Strasbourg, where the professors at the time were more inclined to practical Christianity than to theological disputation. He afterwards spent a year in Geneva, and was powerfully influenced by the strict moral life and rigid ecclesiastical discipline prevalent there, and also by the preaching and the piety of the Waldensian professor Antoine Leger and the converted Jesuit preacher Jean de Labadie. During a stay in Tauerncourt-Bingen, Spener read Grossbohr's Alarm Cry, and in 1666 he entered upon his first pastoral charge at Frankfurt with a profound opinion that the Christian life within evangelical Lutheranism was being sacrificed to zeal for rigid Lutheran orthodoxy. Pietism, as a distinct movement in the German Church, began with religious meetings at Spener's house where he repeated his sermons, expounded passages of the New Testament, and induced those present to join in conversation on religious questions. In 1675, Spener published his Pia Desidera or Earnest Desire for a Reform of the True Evangelical Church, the title giving rise to the term Pietists. This was originally a pejorative term given to the adherents of the movement by its enemies as a form of ridicule, like that of Methodists somewhat later in England. In Pia Desidera, Spener made 6 proposals as the best means of restoring the life of the Church: the earnest and thorough study of the Bible in private meetings, Ecclesolo in Ecclesia, the Christian priesthood being universal, the laity should share in the spiritual government of the Church, a knowledge of Christianity must be attended by the practice of it as its indispensable sign and supplement, instead of merely didactic, and often bitter, attacks on the heterodox and unbelievers, a sympathetic and kindly treatment of them, a reorganization of the theological training of the universities, giving more prominence to the devotional life, a different style of preaching, namely, in the place of pleasing rhetoric, the implanting of Christianity in the inner or new man, the soul of which is faith, and its effects the fruits of life. This work produced a great impression throughout Germany. While large numbers of Orthodox Lutheran theologians and pastors were deeply offended by Spener's book, many other pastors immediately adopted Spener's proposals. Early leaders. In 1686 Spener accepted an appointment at the court chaplaincy at Dresden, which opened to him a wider though more difficult sphere of labor. In Leipzig, a society of young theologians was formed under his influence for the learned study and devout application of the Bible. 3 magistrates belonging to that society, one of whom was August Hermann Frank, subsequently the founder of the famous orphanage at Halle, commenced courses of expository lectures on the scriptures of a practical and devotional character, and in the German language, which was zealously frequented by both students and townsmen. The lectures, however, aroused the ill will of the other theologians and pastors of Leipzig, and Frank and his friends left the city, and with the aid of Christian Amasius and Spener founded the new University of Halle. The theological chairs in the new university were filled in complete conformity with Spener's proposals. The main difference between the new pietistic Lutheran school and the Orthodox Lutherans arose from the Pietists' conception of Christianity as chiefly consisting in a change of heart and consequent holiness of life. Orthodox Lutherans rejected this viewpoint as a gross simplification, stressing the need for the Church and for sound theological underpinnings. Spener died in 1705, but the movement, guided by Frank and fertilized from Halle, spread through the whole of Middle and North Germany. Among its greatest achievements, apart from the philanthropic institutions founded at Halle, were the revival of the Moravian Church in 1727 by Count von Zinzendorf, Spener's godson and a pupil in the Halle School for Young Noblemen, and the establishment of Protestant missions. Spener stressed the necessity of a new birth and separation of Christians from the world. Many Pietists maintained that the new birth always had been preceded by agonies of repentance, and that only a regenerated theologian could teach theology. The whole school shunned all common worldly amusements, such as dancing, the theatre, and public games. Some believe this led to a new form of justification by works. Its Ecclesiolo in Ecclesia also weakened the power and meaning of church organization. These pietistic attitudes caused a counter-movement at the beginning of the 18th century. One leader was Valentin Ernst La Paragraphe, superintendent at Dresden. Establishment reaction equals, authorities within state-endorsed religions were suspicious of Pietist doctrine, which they often viewed as a social danger, as it seemed either to generate an excess of evangelical fervor and so disturb the public tranquility, or to promote a mysticism so nebulous as to obscure the imperatives of morality. A movement which cultivated religious feeling almost as an end itself. While some Pietists held that mysticism and the moral law went together, for others Pietist mysticism did less to reinforce the moral law than to take its place. The principle of guidance by inner light was often a signal to follow the most intense of her inner sentiments. The supremacy of feeling over reason. Religious authorities could bring pressure on Pietists, such as when they brought some of Megni's followers before the local consistory to answer questions about their unorthodox views, or when they banished Pastor Megni from Bethany for heterodoxy in 1713. Later history equals. As a distinct movement, Pietism had its greatest strength by the middle of the 18th century. Its very individualism in fact helped to prepare the way for the Enlightenment, which took the Church in an altogether different direction. Yet some claim that Pietism contributed largely to the revival of biblical studies in Germany and to making religion once more an affair of the heart and of life and not merely of the intellect. It likewise gave a new emphasis to the role of the laity in the Church. Rudolf Sochem claimed that it was the last great surge of the waves of the ecclesiastical movement begun by the Reformation. It was the completion and the final form of the Protestantism created by the Reformation. Then came a time when another intellectual power took possession of the minds of men. Dietrich Bonhoeffer of the German Confessing Church framed the same characterization in less positive terms when he called Pietism the last attempt to save Christianity as a religion, given that for him religion was a negative term, more or less an opposite to revelation. This constitutes a rather scathing judgment. Bonhoeffer denounced the basic aim of Pietism, to produce a desired piety in a person, as unbiblical. Pietism is considered the major influence that led to the creation of the Evangelical Church of the Union in Prussia in 1817. The King of Prussia ordered the Lutheran and Reformed churches in Prussia to unite. They took the name Evangelical as a name both groups had previously identified with. This union movement spread through many German lands in the 1800s. Pietism, with its looser attitude toward confessional theology, had opened the churches to the possibility of uniting. The unification of the two branches of German Protestantism sparked the schism of the Old Lutherans. Many Lutherans, called Old Lutherans, formed free churches or immigrated to the United States and Australia, where they formed bodies that would later become the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and the Lutheran Church of Australia, respectively. Pietism was a major influence on John Wesley and others who began the Methodist movement in 18th-century Great Britain. John Wesley was influenced significantly by Moravians and Pietists connected to Frank and Halle Pietism. The fruit of these Pietist influences can be seen in the modern American Methodists and members of the Holiness movement. Pietism did not die out in the 18th century, but was alive and active in the Evangelische Kirchenverein des Westens. The church president from 1901 to 1914 was a Pietist named Dr. Jacob Pister. Some vestiges of Pietism were still present in 1957 at the time of the formation of the United Church of Christ. However, in the 19th century, there was a revival of confessional Lutheran doctrine, known as the Neo-Lutheran movement. This movement focused on a reassertion of the identity of Lutherans as a distinct group within the broader community of Christians, with a renewed focus on the Lutheran confessions as a key source of Lutheran doctrine. Associated with these changes was a renewed focus on traditional doctrine and liturgy, which paralleled the growth of Anglo-Catholicism in England. Some writers on the history of Pietism for example Hagband Ritschl have included under it nearly all religious tendencies amongst Protestants of the last 3 centuries in the direction of a more serious cultivation of personal piety than that prevalent in the various established churches. Ritschl 2 treats Pietism as a retrograde movement of Christian life towards Catholicism. Some historians also speak of a later or modern Pietism, characterizing thereby a party in the German Church probably influenced by remains of Spener's Pietism in Westphalia, on the Rhine, in Wannenwörttemberg, Halle, and Berlin. The party was chiefly distinguished by its opposition to an independent scientific study of theology, its principal theological leader being Hengstenberg, and its chief literary organ the Evangelische Kirchenzeitung. Pietism also had a strong influence on contemporary artistic culture in Germany. Though unread today, the Pietist Johann Georg Hamann held a strong influence in his day. Pietist belief in the power of individual meditation on the divine a direct, individual approach to the ultimate spiritual reality of God was probably partly responsible for the uniquely metaphysical, idealistic nature of German Romantic philosophy. International influence. Pietism had an influence on American religion, as many German immigrants settled in Pennsylvania, New York and other areas. Its influence can be traced in evangelicalism. Barmer says that evangelicalism itself, I believe, is quintessentially North American phenomenon, deriving as it did from the confluence of Pietism, Presbyterianism, and the vestiges of Puritanism. Evangelicalism picked up the peculiar characteristics from each strain warm-hearted spirituality from the Pietists, doctrinal precisionism from the Presbyterians, and individualistic introspection from the Puritans even as the North American context itself has profoundly shaped the various manifestations of evangelicalism, fundamentalism, neo-evangelicalism, the holiness movement, Pentecostalism, the charismatic movement, and various forms of African American and Hispanic evangelicalism. Bartholomew Currency Siegenbalg was a member of the Lutheran clergy and the first Pietist missionary to India. See also. References. Pietism. Catholic Encyclopedia. New York, Robert Appleton Company 1913. This article incorporates text from a publication now in the public domain, Chisholm, Hugh, ed. Encyclopædia Britannica. Cambridge University Press. Further reading, Brown, Dale, Understanding Pietism, Rev. ed. Napanee, Indiana, Evangel Publishing House, 1996. Brunner, Daniel L. Halle Pietists in England, Anthony William Boreham and the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge. Arbeiten zur Geschichte des Pietismus 29. Gar Paragraph Tingen, Germany, Vandenhoek and Ruprecht, 1993. Olson, Roger E., Christian T. Collins Wynne. Reclaiming Pietism, Retrieving an Evangelical Tradition XI plus 190 pp. Online review, Shantz, Douglas H. An Introduction to German Pietism, Protestant Renewal at the Dawn of Modern Europe. Baltimore, Johns Hopkins University Press, 2013. Stoeffler, F. Ernest. The Rise of Evangelical Pietism. Studies in the History of Religion 9. Leiden, E. J. Brill, 1965. Stoeffler, F. Ernest. German Pietism During the 18th Century. Studies in the History of Religion 24. Leiden, E. J. Brill, 1973. Stoeffler, F. Ernest ed. Continental Pietism and Early American Christianity. Grand Rapids, Michigan, Edmonds, 1976. Wynne, Christian T. A. L. eds. The Pietist Impulse in Christianity. Older works Joachim Feller, Sonnet. In Luctus et Desideriacibus, a Martinum Bonium prosequibanta quidam Petroni, praeceptors et comici. Lipsari, 1689, pp. 2, a 3, Luctus et Desideria. Tar 1/4 Bingen 2008, pages 24 a 25. Here for the first time the newly detected source. A less exactly cf. Martin Brecht, Geschichte des Pietismus, vol. I, pages 4. Johann Georg Walk, Historische und Theologische Einleitung in die Religionsstreitigkeiten der evangelisch-lutherischen Kirche. Friedrich August Tholuck, Geschichte des Pietismus und des Stadiums der Aufkla Currency-Rung. Heinrich Schmidt, Die Geschichte des Pietismus. Max Gerbel, Geschichte des Christlichen Lebens in der Rheinisch-Westphal-Currency-lichen Kirche. The subject is dealt with at length in Isaac August Dorner's and W. Gass's Histories of Protestant Theology. Other works are Heinrich Hepp, Geschichte des Pietismus und der Mystik in der Reformierten Kirche, which is sympathetic. Albrecht Ritschl, Geschichte des Pietismus, which is hostile. And Eugen Sachs, Ursprung und Wesen des Pietismus. See also Friedrich Wilhelm Franz Nippold's article and Thiel. Stud. Unkritiken, pages 347. 392. Hans von Schubert, Outlines of Church History, CHXV. And Karl Mirbt's article, Pietismus, in Herzog Hochsrell Encyclopädie Currency die Fahr 1/4 Uprot. Theology U. Kirch, and of Vol XV. The most extensive and current edition on Pietism is the 4-volume edition in German, covering the entire movement in Europe and North America, Geschichte des Pietismus, im Auftrag der Historischen Kommission zur Erforschung des Pietismus herausgegeben von Martin Brecht, Klaus Deppermann, Ulrich Gar Currency Blair und Hartmut Lehmann, English, on behalf of the Historical Commission for the Study of Pietism edited by Martin Brecht, Klaus Deppermann, Ulrich Gabler and Hartmut Lehmann, Band 1, Der Pietismus vom 16. bis zum Frau 1/4 16. Jahrhundert. In Zusammenarbeit mit Johannes van den Berg, Klaus Deppermann, Johannes Friedrich Gerhard Goethes und Hans Schneider H.G. von Martin Brecht. Goettingen 1993. /584p. Band 2, Der Pietismus im 16. Jahrhundert. In Zusammenarbeit mit Friedhelm Eichfer, Johannes van den Berg, Rudolf Delsberger, Johann Friedrich Gerhard Goethes, Manfred Jakubowski Thiessen, Peter Lazonen, Dietrich Meyer, Ingan Montgomery, Christian Peters, A. Greg Roeber, Hans Schneider, Patrick Striff und Horst Weigelt H.G. von Martin Brecht und Klaus Deppermann. Goettingen 1995. /826p. Band 3, Der Pietismus im 19. Jahrhundert. In Zusammenarbeit mit Gustav Adolf Benrath, Eberhard Busch, Pavel Filippi, und Gar Paragraphslemann, Peter Lazonen, Hartmut Lehmann, Mark A. Knoll, Jar Paragraph Agiolamaka, Karl Renstick und Horst Weigelt unter Mitwirkung von Martin Solman H.G. von Ulrich Gar Currency Blair. Goettingen 2000. /607p. Band 4, Globenzelt und Lebenswelten des Pietismus. In Zusammenarbeit mit Ruth Albrecht, Martin Brecht, Christian Bummers, Ulrich Gar Currency Blair, Andreas Gestrick, Horst Gundlach, Jan Harasimowicz, Manfred Jakubowski Tyson, Peter Kreidke, Martin Kruse, Werner Koch, Marcus Matthias, Thomas Mar 1/4 Lehrbach, Gerhard Schakarentsiefer, Hans Jar 1/4 Gen Schrader, Walter Spahn, Udo Straven Ukarensieder, Rudolf von Madden, Richard Trellner, Johannes Wollmann und Hermann Wellenruther H. G. von Hartmut Lehmann. Goettingen 2004/709p. External links, New Schaff-Herzog Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge, Vol. 9, Pietism, After 3 Centuries The Legacy of Pietism by E. C. Friedrich, Literary Landmarks of Pietism by Martin O. Westerhorse, Pietism's World Mission Enterprise by Ernst H. Wendland, The Evangelical Pietist Church of Chatfield.